points. Part of this energy transition in Germany is cultural. You know, it's political in the sense that there are a lot of people behind it. Average people know a lot about energy and are really into fighting for renewable energy. But even, when I was in Berlin, there was a renewable energy art show. We don't see that level of interest in energy. So, I like this one. This one was sort of funny, kind of a whimsical one, because two people built their own little windmills for their backpacks, and they traveled for like 21 days, like 3 weeks, in the windiest part of the world I've ever seen. I think it was in Iceland, and they were wandering around Iceland. And the point was to show when they got back, they used all the electricity they produced for 3 weeks. It was all used up in one thing of laundry.
Oh no!
So they were showing that it's complicated. You need a lot of electricity to support the consumer, the way we live. We live, and we're not even aware. Like, think of how much electricity we're consuming just sitting here, right? So that actually gets to another big focus of the energy transition, which is something that Push has been focusing on a while, which is efficiency, energy efficiency. They always say, this is not about solar, it's not about wind. First and foremost, it's about how much are we using and how much can we do to improve to cut that down. So that's what Push Green is all about. Folks here probably know about Push Green, but Push Green is our energy efficiency unit. City like Buffalo, you could cut down your emissions, 40% just by insulating properly and having better, more modern heating systems. So that's where it starts. It's part of the same system, and then it's also, you can imagine, in terms of energy democracy, it makes us less dependent on big corporations for our energy if we're not using as much. I just put that up because it reminded me of Bugs Bunny, but it's a big, one thing that you see in Germany when you're looking at this industry is production, especially in wind. You see big factories doing this stuff, and you see people working in those factories. And, at mass scale, these windmills are just unbelievably large. And this is just a little part, just a tiny little part in this massive turbine. So now we're going to just turn to this town. Now, the town only has 200 people in it, so it's not the West Side, or even the village of, Akron or something. It's a tiny little town, but it has a lot of lessons in terms of what the future might hold for us, especially, hopefully, if we can really get control of our energy. And so the town is called Feldheim. It's about half hour outside of Berlin. And what they have done is they set out to become completely off the grid. You hear about a house off the grid in the woods. This is a whole village that doesn't pay national fuel, doesn't pay national grid, or any utility like that for its heating or its lights. It produces it in the town. In fact, it produces so much energy that it exports 97% of it. It is sent out of the town. Okay. The other big thing is they're doing that all renewably. There isn't any coal burning or other carbon being burnt in this town. And so it started, their biggest energy source is this wind turbine farm, which actually is a partnership between a wind developer, a private money-making developer, and the town. It's about a 50-50% partnership. And they built, I think, 27 turbines at this point. And what you can't quite see here is this is right. You can walk from here right to the center of town. It's right compact in the town. Just took a picture looking up at one of the turbines, the windmills. And then I mentioned already that other little picture of the microgrid, but here, this isn't their microgrid, but they have a microgrid. And really all a microgrid means is that you see those solar panels and the windmills, they're pumping that energy right into their localized grid for use in their homes or their businesses. And then that load has to be managed. You know, it sometimes has to be managed for a few reasons, both on the production side and the consumption side. Production obviously has to be managed if there's no wind one day. You got to figure out how are you going to get the right electricity into that grid that day. If you don't have wind and it's a cloudy day, you have to do some management. Sometimes, and this is becoming an increasingly important part of energy, is batteries, localized battery that we might have in this grid to manage those low production days. So, you could be storing up in that battery for a month, and then if you hit one of those days. The other reason that electricity has to be managed is the other side, consumption. You know, on a hot day, people turning on their air conditioners and watching TV and, you know, all that stuff that you might do on a hot day, that's going to drive the consumption up, and you have to figure out how to pump more electricity into the grid that day. So that's a part of a microgrid. And then you have the question of how does a microgrid connect or not connect to the big grid. Most of them do still, because for some of the reasons I already mentioned, some of the load management, some days you might actually just have to get energy off the big grid, because there's no wind and it's been a week without wind. The other reason is to connect to the big grid is to send it out and sell it to the big grid, and that's what Feldheim does. One interesting thing about the politics of this is the utility company there was apparently so fearful of what they're doing, because obviously it shows them that they don't need a utility company, and maybe we don't either, that they wouldn't let them buy the existing grid that the town had and turn it into their own microgrid. They would not sell it. So that grid is dead. It just sits there in the town, and they had to build their own microgrid kind of on top of it. And that's just because they didn't want to give anyone control. The wrong idea that you could be independent of their grid.
No, the right idea.
The right idea, right.
Language. We got to use the right language.
That's why we got you, Bob. So another thing that they've done, which is really cool, and do we have any engineers in this house? Okay, I'm gonna fake it until someone calls me on it. But so there's electricity, which I've been talking about with solar and wind, and then there's the heat side, right? Like how are we getting our heat? Here we get it from natural gas, which is becoming increasingly bad for the earth. We're trying more and more dangerous ways of getting that gas out, the fracking. It's also, they might try to convince us that it's a clean fuel, but we know the production of that fuel and the burning of it is a carbon-based process. So they had a tight village. They had already solved their electricity problem with these windmills and with the solar installation that I don't have a picture of. But they wanted to do something on the heating side, right? So they decided to have what's called a district heating system. And actually, this is a cogeneration plant, meaning that it simultaneously produces some electricity for those days when their windmills are just totally silent. And it produces hot water that gets pumped through tubes, through pipes, underground. They bury the pipes all the way up to each house, and then pumped once it hits the house through rubberized tubing. If you've been to some push houses, we actually do this. We do radiant floor heating produced through a geothermal system. Theirs isn't geothermal. They burn manure through. They convert manure into a biogas, a nitrogen-based gas that is then used to burn to heat the water. manure, and then corn, a corn byproduct. I forgot exactly what part of the corn this is, but it's, you know, two what are called biogas fuels, and then heat it in a big boiler, pump it through the whole town. So no one pays a gas bill, no one pays, you know, no one has a furnace in their house. It's all produced centrally. Now, one of the...
Is it the same thing as fueling your car with biogas? Because I've seen that happen.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, sounds right. Let me say that. I mean, it's the same type of fuel, and then it can, rather than getting converted into, you know, powering those cylinders in a car, it gets converted into a boiler to heat the water and then pumped out. But another thing, so this sounds kind of far out, right? But one thing to know that very few people know about Buffalo is we have a very large system that is not totally dissimilar to this downtown. We have steam tunnels that heat 9 buildings. They're public buildings. You know the firehouse behind City Hall? That's where the steam boiler is. And I actually don't know. Does anyone in the room know what the input fuel is? I'm assuming it's gas at this point, natural gas. But the steam is pumped into City Hall, so City Hall doesn't pay a national fuel bill. They, you know, which is good. So we have something to build from. And I just actually learned recently in a random way that they had studied in the 1990s building the steam tunnels down Niagara Street and down Broadway to connect to more buildings. But it's basically the same principle of Feldheim. Produce either hot water or steam centrally and then push it out through your town or through your city.
Click on that for a minute.
Sure.
You know that we met 2 weeks ago, and you mentioned that City Hall had that heating.
Yes.
And the day this snow, just the recent snow, I went to the bank for the credit union.
Oh, right there, right behind you.
As I walked in, the entrance of that is so clean that it was not shovel, it was melted.
Okay.
And I asked the security guy.
Why?
I said, "Oh my God, how come it's so clean over here, not over there?" He said, "We got pipes in there that warms it up."
There you go. So that's that steam that's getting pumped right into City Hall.
You can do the same thing with the streets instead of having stoves. Oh, yeah.
That's right.
Because I've researched that stuff before.
So that's an extra benefit for a city like Buffalo. We need a lot of melting. So this is just a look at that, the boiler or part of the biogas plant where the corn stalks and the manure gets processed. For Ez, I had to put this picture in. Ez, do you want to say what this is? Permeable paver. So one thing I'll just say before Ez says what this is that like us, like Push, you know, we have our green development zone. I don't know how many people have been on a tour of what we're doing here, but it's, you know, in many ways motivated by the same ideals that Feldheim has. You know, don't be dependent on corporations. Don't ruin the earth with carbon-based fuels. Lower prices. I forgot to mention their prices. They own everything, but they still have to, you know, pay their charge to their co-op, and it's about 25% lower than they were paying when the utility was, you know, funding them, or I mean, not funding them, but providing their energy. So, but what you see in Germany is not just solar and wind; it's a whole consciousness around the climate and around ways of living that are good for people. So bike paths everywhere. You know, biking is a big thing. Walking is a big thing. You can always walk to the edge of town. And then green infrastructure is also a big thing. So this basically, what is this?
It might be a house parking pad on permeable pavement where water can filter and get clean of all the contaminants before it goes back into groundwater.
Right. And as has built a lot of these systems, so Bob maintains them on the west side, because there's this, I don't think they have the same problem here because it's not near a waterway. But for us, this is particularly important on the west side because if this water wasn't absorbed in our permeable paver, we have one that's very similar, except ours is better because the grass hasn't grown through it. The water goes into those, you know, those holes, right? Rather than going into the storm drain. And for the west side, every time the water goes into the storm drain, it pushes raw sewage right out the Albany Street pipe. So, and we have pictures of kids swimming right next to where the raw sewage is coming out because the water pushed it out. So this helps to prevent that by having the land absorb the water instead of the sewage system.
Were there city streets the same thing?
They had a lot of green infrastructure in the cities as well, for sure. So that's actually my last slide. But I just want to stress as I close out here that, what they've done, we do have a bit of a start on here on the west side and really in Buffalo in general with what we've been doing with our green development zone. I think at this point we've retrofitted about 110 homes if you include the buildings we've purchased ourselves as push and dramatically reduced the amount of energy they're using. So that's where it starts with energy efficiency. And then we've also helped to make happen 2 geothermal systems. One is right a block down on Grant Street. One is at our house at 10 Winter Street for heating purposes. And then we've done, at this point, 4 solar systems. 2 on the next block here on Grant, and then 2 on our buildings on Winter Street. And the good news is that we're going to be doing a lot more solar. In the coming weeks, we're going to announce a new program to help people get solar on their roofs. And this is a piece of energy democracy. There's another piece which is like making sure that the corporations don't get to say what our energy policy is because we know what they want. They want to just keep producing the way they've been producing, get to charge whatever they want to charge because they have monopolies. We want what Germany has, which is, distributed energy, distributed generation that's owned by the people. So that's what I saw in Germany, and that's what's going to keep motivating us to do it here. So thanks everybody for attending. I guess, have to take a few questions and then go from there.